Hey everyone, this is PrinceBrightstar. So this video was originally just going to be a response to Gwiz of the Stars, but the video has expanded outside the original scope because I realized I had a chance to talk about a feature here on YouTube that would have been perfect for this, but sadly was removed long ago. For my regular viewers, this is going to be a very different video from what I usually put out. But don't worry, we'll be back to normal next time. And frankly, this was originally brought on by one of the community managers at SEGA, so I think it still counts. Anyway, hang tight, Gwiz, I'll be with you shortly. For everyone else, let's talk about video responses. So, introduced in 2006 and lasting until 2013, YouTube used to have a feature where people could directly respond to someone else's video. All you had to do is head down to the comments section and click the link that says Create a Video Response. And then from there, either select a video you've already uploaded on your account or select to upload a new one at that time. If you opted to upload a new one, you'd have the option to either proceed with the upload, or you could also record via your webcam. Now, considering the times, most people wouldn't have access to the kind of cameras they have today when streaming, so these were typically 480p or 720p webcams at most. Still, back in 2006, YouTube didn't even have support for videos larger than 360p, so it really wasn't even a big deal back then. Boy, how the times have changed. Video responses would show up below the video they were responding to. Now, part of what drove YouTube to eventually remove this feature was their own numbers, specifically the click-through rate, which was only 0.0004%. In other words, only every 4 out of 1 million users that saw a response would even click on it. Since clicks were more important back then than they are today, it makes sense the feature was removed. YouTube, in their wisdom, recommended instead using titles, hashtags, and descriptions so people could find this content instead. So yeah, typing the word response at the end of a search really isn't that hard to do. And there were other problems. Some were using the feature instead to string together a bunch of preview images to advertise other websites on popular videos. So I get why this feature was removed. Still, when else was I ever going to be able to talk about something like this? Alright, let's move on to the actual response I have for Gwiz today. Hey Gwiz, thanks for your interest in my opinions. To recap, you said you were interested in seeing this response based on what I said about needing to create a video based on what you said about, and I'm quoting here,
but the bad guy was actually this dude from a video game 20 years ago that most of you haven't played. That's not good storytelling.
This is going to be my response to that, and to everyone else looking in, this isn't drama. It's just a difference of opinions, and I'm approaching this from a positive angle, with the idea that Gwiz is possibly trying to expand their thinking. Now, let me state up front that when it comes to a brand new property, I agree with you. A story can't very well reference something and have it show up like everyone knows what's going on. Your story needs to earn a sequel before you go down that path, even if that sequel ends up being a prequel. But when we're dealing with the Phantasy Star series, that's just not the case. This is a property that has blown through its 35th anniversary at this point. There are some players, myself included, that have been playing these games since the Bit Wars and remember the lore of the series, although perhaps not with the same clarity as what was once available. Regardless though, the series has a lot of potential if those leading the series would simply tap into it. But I'd like to take my argument more broadly first. There are many series out there that have been around for a long time that, while they're bringing out new problems and enemies within those series, that's not always what happens. There are going to be people that remember the early days of some series, and sometimes those longtime fans see the return of an old enemy bringing about major hype. My argument here is simple. When people stick with a series for a long time, whether it's a book series or a TV series or even a game series, they appreciate it when they are acknowledged by the creators of these series. It's not a bad thing when an old element comes up again, and it can work if it is properly set up for the new audience to understand who or what they were and what happened. In the meanwhile, the longtime fans will simply be in the know and perhaps even know what's going on before the new fans understand. I've got several examples from outside the Phantasy Star series that I'm going to use to illustrate my point today. And then, once that's done, I'm going to bring it back to Phantasy Star. Let's begin with one TV series where time travel is run-of-the-mill. Rather than an ongoing story, this series is more villain of the week, although really it's more villain of the bi-week or month, since stories would often span multiple episodes. In this series, there was a race of cyborgs encased by an armed outer shell. This race did not die, but rather was genetically wired to keep living, though they would age. They had very few vulnerabilities, though the eye was one notable one. They were also time travelers and could rewrite their own history. And they had a very distinct voice, with one line that became synonymous with them in pop culture. That word is exterminate. Exterminate. Exterminate! Indeed, the Daleks from Doctor Who, a race that would enslave many different worlds, forming an empire. Now, they had been a recurring antagonistic race to the Doctor since the fourth, Tom Baker. Anyway, fans of Doctor Who were disappointed when the show was cancelled until the series was revived in 2005 with the ninth Doctor featuring Christopher Eccleston. However, it was between the cancellation and the revival that the Daleks had supposedly finally been defeated during an event called the Last Great Time War, where the Daleks, as well as the Time Lords, that is the race the Doctor is a part of, end up in a mutually assured destruction scenario as all of the Doctors from different time periods join together to freeze time around his home world of Gallifrey. But those that missed out on these audio dramas had no idea that this had happened. This setup gave a clear indication that there were no Daleks left, and those that only started watching the show at this point had no expectation to meet any. However, partway through the series, one did show up calling for help, and when the Doctor realized this is who he was speaking to, the lore dump of what had happened came out. But despite there seemingly being only one left, this wasn't the end. Multiple future versions of the Doctor would encounter more Daleks, including a full-scale invasion of Earth, when millions were released from a prison created by the Time Lords. So in this case, the big bad guy was supposedly defeated off-screen in radio dramas many likely never knew about, but then returned first with one, and then with many, returning the show to the status quo of the Daleks being one of the many antagonists the Doctor had to deal with on a regular basis. Now I know what you're thinking. Everyone knows about the Daleks, right? Well, no. While they were extremely well known in the United Kingdom, that simply was not the case here in the US. And because of how the showrunners took time and care in how they reintroduced this enemy, both old and new viewers were able to get up to speed. But okay, let's bring this back to gaming. Now, if you've never heard of the Lunar series, I'm not surprised. It was only a duo of games, Silver Star and Eternal Blue, along with some side story games. Seriously though, this series is one of those hidden gems that, if you have any interest in classic RPGs, you'll want to give it a playthrough. Originally showing up on the SEGA CD and then remade on several other platforms, Lunar the Silver Star and Lunar Eternal Blue take place 1,000 years apart from each other. Lunar the Silver Star started out with a boy named Alex, who dreamed of following in the footsteps of his hero Dine. Dragon Master Dine had saved the world from destruction and rescued the goddess Althena. Alex's trusty flying friend Null encouraged Alex to go out on his own adventure. The perfect opportunity came up thanks to another friend, Ramus, who said they should go to a local cave to find an item called a dragon diamond. They found it when they encountered the dragon Quark. Quark saw something in Alex, calling him friend, and gifted it. Through several more adventures, they, along with, depending on which version you played, Luna, arrived in Merbia to sell the diamond, and this is where Ramus left and Alex made their way to the floating magic school Vane. It was there that a man by the name of Galleon made their presence known. Galleon, a former hero that joined Dine on his quest, was this game's big bad, but Alex didn't know it at the time. Through several adventures, Galleon eventually made his intentions known when he killed Quark and brought ruin to Alex's hometown of Berg. A long adventure later, Galleon, now calling himself Magic Emperor, having stolen the power of all the dragons, was eventually challenged by Alex's group. This was an attempt to rescue Luna, whom was Althena's human form, that Galleon wanted to restore as a goddess. With Galleon killed and Luna rescued, the pair headed home. Again, this is a gross oversimplification of the story with many plot elements and version differences left out, but it introduced and gave you the fate of Big Bad Galleon. Now we skip 1,000 years later, when Lunar Eternal Blue takes place. There's a party consisting of the game's hero named Hero, spelled H-I-R-O, Lucia, a mysterious traveler from the Blue Star whose power has been stolen by the evil entity Zophar, along with a sometimes drunk and gambling priest Ronfar, a dancer Jean, and a magic user Lamina. Along their quest, they came across a strange visual record depicting the battles from 1,000 years ago. When the party asks among themselves who could have had possession of such an item, a face unfamiliar to the party, but familiar to the players of the prior game walks in. Galleon is somehow alive after being killed 1,000 years ago. Now, Galleon wasn't the final big bad of the game, but he certainly played a significant role as an antagonist to Hero's party. However, towards the end, he had a heel turn, supporting Hero on his journey. Galleon knew he would die shortly after, as it was Zophar that had given him life again. As such, when Hero offered to let Galleon join the party, Galleon refused, providing his sword instead. So in this case, everyone that played the prior game knew he was dead, but he came back, setting up who he was for new players to the series through the visual memory, and even had his character's story progress in this sequel. While not much time had passed real time between the two games, it still came as a shock that a presumably dead character had returned with such a pivotal role. But okay, let's move back to TV, with something that's a bit more comedy focused, a bit more animated, a bit more yellow, a bit more The Simpsons, a show that should need no introduction that many consider to have gone off the deep end after its 11th season, and yet somehow is still on the air today. I'm hoping I don't have to introduce this family, so let's jump straight into my example here. You know, it's funny the timing for all this, because this example only recently became a thing. Anyway, let's talk about a man named Jacques. Jacques was a character first seen in Season 1 of The Simpsons. Now, Jacques wasn't trying to destroy the world or take over a country. No, he was a simple man that wanted to woo a woman away from her husband. In the episode Life on the Fast Lane, Homer buys Marge an inappropriate gift as it was actually intended for himself. He even had his own name engraved on it. However, Marge decides to take this gift, a bowling ball, and starts to bowl herself. Initially unsure how to even roll the thing, Jacques enters. A smooth talker, while he does also show her how to play the game, he has the prior described motive. Homer even finds a gift Jacques got for Marge. A final decision point ultimately comes down when Jacques invites Marge over when Marge starts to develop feelings for him. On her way to his place, however, she decides instead to see her husband Homer, and they step outside the nuclear power plant together, ending the episode, supposedly never to see Jacques again. But in Season 34, Jacques reappeared on the show in the episode Pin Gal, once again to coach Marge on bowling, this time to save a bowling alley. Viewers not around in the first season were introduced to Jacques through Marge reacting negatively. When Jacques shows up to help, Marge, remembering what happened last time, initially rejects Jacques, but eventually takes his help to get ready to bowl. Despite a minor plot hole in this episode, we see that Jacques never got over Marge Simpson, to the point that he created a shrine to her that Homer finds. A fight with bowling balls later at Jacques' place, Marge breaks up the fight. Marge explains at the time she was disappointed and upset at how Homer acted, at which point the audience is treated to times Homer screwed up in the series. This included getting married to someone else in Vegas, hitting on his neighbor's wife, dancing with a hula girl at a company party, among other incidents. But it's here that both Marge and Homer express their love for each other. Later, Marge and Jacques have a bowl-off, and Marge wins, sending Jacques away. So the big bad of the episode was first revealed in the very first season over 30 years ago. But this episode helped old viewers get confirmation of what they had suspected about Jacques, and even more. New viewers got to see a side of Marge they might never have known about. It'll be up to the series if they want to revisit this topic again. Of course, there's other recurring antagonists in this series, such as the other person that can't get over Marge, Artie Ziff. And then, if you want someone that just can't get over trying to take out Bart Simpson, there's Sideshow Bob. But I think we've dwelled on the Simpsons long enough already. Okay, one more from TV, and let's bring it back to sci-fi. Star Trek: The Next Generation. This was a show filled with callbacks and was the first show to start production after the original series ended its production run back in 1969. Now, in 1987, when Next Generation started, you had 18 years of separation, provided you didn't count syndication. In this series, the crew of the Enterprise explores different planets and solves the different problems of those worlds or whatever may threaten the ship. Now, in the Season 1 finale, viewers that hadn't seen the original series had no idea about the enemy that was going to come up, but throughout the episode they were slowly introduced to them. First by LaForge, noting that the heading was going to take them into something called the Neutral Zone, where outposts had been destroyed. The crew assumes Romulans are the cause, despite there having been 50 years in the universe since the last contact. The goal of the ship going into this zone is to determine what happened and establish relations with the Romulans. But if that couldn't happen, they were to show the resolve and force Starfleet is willing to give the situation. In the end, the Romulans do reveal themselves. However, they weren't the ones that attacked the outposts. In fact, their own outposts were attacked as well in the same manner. This meant someone else did it, but they also gave the threat that they were back and would be watching Starfleet. The Romulans would go on to be one of the greater adversaries in the series and beyond. Regardless, despite a B-plot in the episode featuring cryogenically frozen people being revived, the Romulans were a big bad that, through careful introduction in this episode, were able to bring new viewers up to speed for the future threat they meant, while viewers of the old series already knew what they were getting into and may have been excited to see this enemy return. It was also this other unseen enemy that would rear its head in a future season of the show, the Borg, new to both the old and new viewers. Masterfully done introducing two enemies at the same time despite it being a script using the first draft because the 1988 Writers Guild strike hit during production. All that said, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring Phantasy Star up in all this response. I may have my suspected timeline of events in the series, but in reality, names in the Phantasy Star series don't really carry much weight between each sub-series. Dark Falls is the most recurrent enemy in the series. Mother Brain is second behind that. And then you've also got lesser enemies like dragons all over the place that constantly recur as well. But a Dark Falls in PSO, for instance, isn't related to a Dark Falls in PSO2. I mean, really, Dark Falls in PSO didn't even have a sub-name like we have with Elder, Apprentice, Persona, and the like. That wasn't introduced until PSO2. Mother Brain had other sub-names. They were Mother Brain in Algol, Mother Trinity in Rigol and Coral, Mother Brain in Phantasy Star Universe, but was a computer for the AMF forces rather than being built by Earthmen for conquering, and in PSO2 we had just Mother, a Xion clone. But none of these mothers are related to each other. There is, however, one villain that did recur. He was the supposed big bad of the original Phantasy Star until you found Dark Falls. That was Repard Lashik. He was defeated by Elisa's party, however he then showed up again 2,000 years later in Phantasy Star The End of the Millennium in his air castle, brought back to life by a Dark Falls' power. It was here that Chaz Rudy's party had to venture to the air castle in order to retrieve an item stolen by Lashik's servants from a Dazorian temple. However, in this case, he just kinda showed up without much introduction at all. Players that played the original game would have recognized the location, including that the end of the air castle dungeon mirrored the dungeon in the original game. Granted, the English translation changed his name from Lassic to Lashik, causing some confusion there. However, for new players, they were simply told that Rune would know who was waiting for them at the end of the air castle, and Rune simply says that the first Lutz and his party defeated Lashik. This really left new players in the dark, and to me this would have been an opportunity to let the party see Lutz's memories, so they and the player could understand the history of this enemy better. It was interesting, however, to see a man named Lashik on Omega in Phantasy Star Online 2. However, they were not the same one. Instead, they were Varuna Lashik. Despite this, when I first saw the name Lashik was in play, I completely distrusted them. They ultimately had motives to serve Harriet on Omega, and then my distrust paid off in Episode 6 when they served Shiva. There's no confirmed connection between Repard and Varuna Lashik. So I hope I've gotten across the points I tried to make today, and to finish this whole thing off, previously you tried to blow my mind, but I managed to sidestep that by saying Seed when I first saw the Starless. Now it's my turn to try to blow your mind if you haven't noticed it yet. This response was all originally brought about because of the alien species Ds, or when said backwards, is Seed. We, however, know the Ds as Starless because of the internal discussions that happened. I get what happened with the name and agree it was probably for the best that it got changed to Starless. But I also have to point out that for the Starless name Ravid, if you spell that backwards, you get Divar. That name is very similar to one that has shown up in English before in the series, specifically Divars on Rycross in the Algol star system. Sure, they may look different, but I can't resist pointing that one out, which kind of brings this whole thing full circle, doesn't it? And the thing is, I probably never would have noticed it if you had not told your story. Thank you for your time today, Gwiz, and to anyone else that might be watching, thank you for joining me today. This is PrinceBrightstar signing off. I'll catch you next time.